What is going on, Neon Nation, and welcome back to the Neon Arcade for some more Cyberpunk 2077 and Cyberpunk lore. Today we're diving into the sports of Cyberpunk 2020, how drastically they've shifted since the 90s, as well as the corporate interests and backing behind the augmented future of sport. This is based off of Artal Saurian's Cyberpunk 2020, Home of the Brave sourcebook, which 2077 is based on, so if you're interested in the source material, there will be a link in the description. Sports have changed somewhat since the 90s, where the professional sports industry was arguably the most powerful in the world. Generating over $100 billion per annum in media revenues, it's safe to say that sports teams and their players were involved in a very lucrative industry. 20th century athletes drove themselves to insane lengths, driven to the brink by peers, family, and media in an effort to be good enough to demand salaries and contracts that could add up to as much as $50 million per year. With perfection being the name of the game, athletes were tortured psychologically, as well as injected with primitive steroids and hormones to reach their peaks. This left many athletes crippled, disillusioned, and psychotic post-retirement. The overall system in the 90s was of disposability and highly destructive to mainly the athletes, who were mere showpieces groomed for spectator enjoyment. As the collapse wreaked havoc upon the economic, social, and political structure of the United States, the change in taste in satiating entertainment did as well. More violence naturally became an obsession to match the turmoil and disillusionment of much of the American population. By around 2002, the concept of augmented sports was refined to its modern look. Many massive stadiums which held tens of thousands of spectators were left to rust, rot, and crumble, whilst others served as jails or command posts. These are the last remaining reminders of the golden age of professional sports, which largely died in the 90s. The information age demanded a global and brutal change in the rule set for already established sports. The corporations began to take over the sponsorship of games, which first appeared in the only sport with true global appeal in soccer. The Arasaka Sakuras, Militech Rangers, and the Orbital Air Flyers began generating momentum with the public, and by 2006 the first augmented players were added to their rosters. By 2008, so much the game was cybernetic that the ball had to be redesigned to handle 500 psi impacts. In 2012, the design was changed yet again to a smaller design to withstand the pressure, but also to showcase the player's finesse. In 2020, football is regaining popularity after being the king of American sports pre-collapse, mostly due to it being the most violent sanctioned sport of 2020. The only rule here is heavy augmentation, and only full conversion cyborgs and linear frames are banned from play. Full body plating, which is allowed, is often adorned by spikes, and fatalities are a must to reach sky-high ratings. Because there is so much cyberware used, they're often on quick change mounts to combat cyberpsychosis that would be present if it was perpetually on the player. Whilst from the outside the game of football looks like it would be a free-for-all bloodbath, it is naturally more of a game of finesse and style. In this era, the field size is cut in half and makes avoidance of collisions and tackles even harder to navigate for a player, but other elements of old school football remain the same. Things like rushing, passing, blocking, blitzing are still integral in victory. The ball, although made of ballistic nylon to accommodate higher impacts, still looks more or less the same. Football is undoubtedly the most violent sanctioned sport, but overall pales in comparison to the unsanctioned gang and nomad sports of 2020. Gang warfare is so widespread that gangs have come to the conclusion that with police and corporations watching their every move, settling gang disputes can be more economical. Only the most heinous offenses should degenerate groups into an all-out war, but for simple disagreements and misdoings, gangs have created a number of sports to replace what would be this battle. Gang sports are disorganized affairs and tend to not have any sense of cohesive teams or referees. If there do happen to be referees, they're usually armed with assault rifles and are only attending to dissuade a greater dispute. There are no time limits on games and only end when the other team of typically 4 to 5 players cannot continue. Multiple gangs or nomad families can compete, and the objective is to temporarily incapacitate the other team, so outright killing or maiming is forbidden. The sports collectively played by these gangs are colloquially known as sticking and comes from the similarity of each sport's equipment, which all use different permutations of what is essentially a stick. There are so many different variants of the stick that the term sticking is just the easiest way to refer to all different versions. The gangs of South California usually resolve disputes with a permutation known as Stickball, which is somewhat akin to hockey with 3 forwards, 2 backs of defense, and a goalie. The arena is typically in a warehouse and there are as many goals as there are teams, typically between 2 and 4. The object of Stickball is to score a goal formed by a corner the depth of 3 meters. The stick itself is a cross between a lacrosse racket and a cudgel, and to score a legitimate goal, the ball must hit 2 of the 3 goal triangles in a single ricochet. The main goal of the game is to obviously score more goals, but also to put the other team out of commission using physicality. Players are heavily armored, and thus typically they're only stunned for a second or two when it comes to body checks and in-game violence. Now, some vanilla golden age sports do exist, such as golf, which is popular amongst the corporates and executives, as well as baseball, which is still a primarily unaugmented sport. Combat handball is also extremely popular amongst the corporate crowd and is another trial by fire styled activity that the corporates flock to prove their worth. In 2020, athletes are massive investments for the corporate interests who back them, especially pertaining to athletes in the realm of combat and death sports. With players of augmented soccer and football demanding higher salaries in relation to risk, endorsements become integral into recouping their cash. This makes a short career due to death less of a liability to big business, who get their athletes to peddle everything from shoes to shirts. With around 75% of augmented football athletes not surviving a full 5 active seasons, big sums of money have to be made in a short time frame for the initial investment to be worth it. Advances in medical technology have reduced deaths per game of these augmented sports to an average of 2, although maiming still exists, which leads to a brutal recovery process. There are even rumors that many current athletes are actually brain dead, living on chipped routines that keep them moving and playing under AI control. Although combat sports are incredibly popular, true death sports are mainly enjoyed in underground entertainment venues out of the overseeing eye of the public. The only thing close to nationwide big money death sports are the North American finals of the World Kumite tournament that passes through every 2 years. Despite attempts to keep combat drugs and cyberware to a minimum, killings in the ring happen often. Other areas of the world, on the other hand, sponsor prison inmate gladiator contests, full contact obstacle courses, and other war games. These sports are illegal in America, but as always, the forces of supply and demand will dictate its prevalence over time. Thank you guys for watching, and for more Cyberpunk, join Neon Nation by subscribing to the Neon Arcade.